Hello everyone! Welcome to my show. I guess Turf Wars. I suppose I'm still calling it that. Um, if you're new here, welcome. I am Katie Montgomery, internet dickhead and trans person who is fighting to make the world a better place for everyone, but also trans people, like specifically. How is everyone in chat doing? I hope you're all well. So, heads up for this stream and probably the next week's worth of videos that are going to come out of it. I have a bit of a cold. I'm a bit sniffy. I'm a bit sneezy. I've got tissues. Oh, they're invisible. Let's just see what we can do. I might have to finish before I go through all the topics because my voice feels a bit like even worse than normal. We've got sound, amazing. We've got no tech issues. The voice isn't down pitched. I'm recording it. I'm on Twitch. I'm on YouTube. It's all working. I originally did have my hair like this, but then I thought if I sit forwards, it just looks like I'm naked. So we're having it like this. Sorted. No tech issues this time. Exactly. This is a tech issues free stream. Well, we've never had tech issues on this show. Long-time viewers of Turf Wars will know we've never had tech issues before, and we'll never have them in the future. So it's all good. Whose channel is this and where's Katie? The fake Katie has tech issues. Real mayonnaise destroying, mayonnaise hating. Pro trans rights Katie is tech issues free. Yeah, I could have Lemsip, but I don't know. I've got Tesco's own summer fruit squash in a music festival cup instead. So summer fruits is not the optimum squash flavor. Oh, by the way, for anyone who's not British, squash is like cordial, but like for cheap, like for cordial for working class people. I don't know. It's like you get water, you fill like a pint of water up or 500 mils of water, and then you put in like 1 centimeter of flavoring, and then it just makes it like fruity water. Or maybe you put the squash in first and then the water on top. I'm not I don't have any allegiance to either of those. I'm sure that's very controversial, the order you do those in. But in the UK, we drink squash, or we drink cordial if we're posh. And I'm drinking squash. But summer fruits isn't the best flavor. The best flavor is like apple or maybe peach or pear. They're the best ones. Squish. Yeah, I think maybe people in the southwest call it squish. I don't know, but I've definitely called it squash. Yeah, I'm sure we're just gonna do a whole show about flavors of fruit juice and whether it's called squish or squash or cordial. What does cordial mean as flavor? So I don't know. I don't know what Americans and other people in the world might call this, but like you just have normal water out the tap, and then you got like this bottle of like colored strong. If you were to just drink straight out of the bottle, it'd be horrible, way too sweet. And you just go like, and then it like mixes in, and then it just tastes like it's not real fruit juice. It's like Ribena. If you've ever had Ribena, yeah, strawberry Ribena. It's pretty good. I when I was a kid, I basically only would drink blackcurrant. Blackcurrant squash fine, Ribena fine. That was the only thing I drank for a good section of my life. I don't know how many years till I was a teenager, and all of a sudden one day I just was like, don't like this anymore, and I haven't really ever gone back. And then I switched to apple squash, and I just drank pretty much just that for ages. Now I've branched out and I drink anything, but I was a bit linear on my drink choices when I was a kid. But anyway, we are going to talk about trans rights. So just thought I'd see how everyone in chat's doing, but we were just talking about juice now. So the Scottish is diluting juice. Yeah, I mean, sometimes I just call it juice, but it's not actually juice because juice is like squashed fruits, and this is, I don't know. I don't. It's concentrate. Maybe you could call it concentrate. Um. So what does Poppy think of? Well, so I have literally like 50 different festival cups. This one is from can't really see. Oh, there you go. This one is from Tolmanator, which is a music festival in Slovenia. So is this one actually. Um, but I've got ones from Hellfest, Download, Bloodstock, Wacken, um, Metal Days, a bunch of other ones. And I don't know, it's just what I drink out of. And Poppy also will only drink out of cup, like festival cups. If you put water in a bowl for her on a saucer, she's not interested. But if you have a cup of water, she'll drink out of it. So on my table, I always have one of squash and one of water, so that Poppy will drink out of something that isn't my juice. And she doesn't really. She's not a massive fan of the fruit juice, but if it's the only thing, like if I've forgotten to put one out for water for her, then she will drink it. So so that's probably bad for her teeth. So I have to probably bad for everything. It doesn't have much sugar in. It's like no added sugar. But anyway, why are we talking about squash? We've been talking about squash for like 5 minutes now. We are going to talk about trans rights and LGBT rights and stuff. The first thing actually I wanted to talk about was on like actions we can do, and it's because it's the last thing I did. So I've been contacting various other trans rights activists and trans rights groups. If I haven't contacted you yet, it's because you're not real and you're fake and you can fuck off. No, it's because I haven't contacted everyone, but I do want to talk to loads of people and see where we are as a community, particularly in the UK, but further afield too, and see what we can do to change things, because whatever has been going on isn't necessarily working. I do think that in one sense we're up against like an impossible enemy. Like the thing opposing trans rights is like the international fascist conservative billionaire class. The richest, loudest, most powerful people on earth are all made hating trans people one of their like top 3 things. Like J.K. Rowling, Elon Musk, Donald Trump, like multiple leaders of governments, Vladimir Putin, Viktor Orban, like loads of people. And so in one sense, what we do doesn't matter that much because we're so outgunned. But on the other hand, I do feel like there is more stuff we can do in terms of like campaigning and our strategy as a community and what things we focus our effort on and how we organize. And so I have been discussing about like creating a central source for like trans rights articles and evidence and papers and stuff. That is on the back burner. I'm still thinking about that. Still making very slow progress. And still fully intend to do something along those lines. But another thing that I've been thinking about, and I just had a meeting about, was the idea of taking more, or just more in general, media things. And I know we talked a bit before in a previous episode about taking more hostile media gigs, but also more positive ones, but mainly thinking about the strategy for taking them. And what I was thinking was, like, the gender critical movement has a lot of resources. They have people who are full-time gender critical anti-trans campaigners. Like the people at Sex Matters get like unlimited funding. Their entire career is like trying to take away trans people's rights. And there are very few people on our side in that position. So they get training from like the global right-wing like lobbying groups and stuff. I mean, this isn't like a conspiracy theory or anything. These right-wing groups, these like Tufton Street groups do get media training. They get like strategy meetings and pick their lines and stuff. And although the gender critical movement as a whole is very ridiculous and conspiracy theory minded, they still do have some core arguments that they use. It's why, like, you know, all of this Donald Trump stuff is saying the exact same phrases as like Mayor Forstater and stuff have been saying for the last 10 years about defending biological sex, and you know, it's all the same stuff, and it's because it's their lines that they've decided work. And I think that although their arguments and their ideology are garbage, and when you like look at them, they just fall apart, and they're internally contradictory, and they're not based on evidence, they're working as propaganda. And I think we're relying on the evidence and facts and things, which is good that that's on our side. Well, it's good we're on the side of that. Like, I think if the facts weren't on our side, we'd be on the wrong side. But I feel like we can do a better job on the propaganda front too, because the gender criticals are very good at it. And here, not propaganda doesn't mean like Soviet style lying for the government. I mean, getting your message across and engaging with media, not just the legacy media, but social media and all kinds of different things. I just don't think our messaging is super great at the moment, and our strategies and stuff of we shouldn't have to debate this. Like, there's a common thing you'd hear for the last like 15 years is like, we shouldn't have to debate trans rights. Like, people's rights aren't up for debate. And like, yep, totally agree. We should not have to debate people's human rights. But we are, and now the most powerful people on earth are going out of their way to eradicate our rights, and they're using arguments from the gender critical movement. So we've got to do it. Like, that's the sad reality of it. And if you don't want to do it, then, well, kind of tough. But if you can't do it, I mean, as we've talked about, arguing isn't the only thing you can do for trans rights. Watch the previous video on that. There's loads of stuff you can do what you're good at. But when it comes to a media strategy or a strategy for the trans rights movement or for pushing forwards the momentum that we need to build up, I think we just need to not have that as a core thing. Like, if you feel like this is bullshit, I shouldn't have to debate my rights. Like, I totally agree with you. You should not have to debate your rights. And that's not just true for trans people. That's true for like disabled people and, you know, immigrants and women who need abortions and all kinds of things. But the reality is that we're like, trans people are like number 2 on the fascist target list after immigrants at the moment. Or around, you know, in the top 5 topics they talk about. So we just have to. And another thing is, like, when you're engaged with some of these arguments, I think sometimes people are almost expecting some kind of implied respect for all parties involved in the discussion. And so when someone says something disgusting about trans people, like just says that all trans people are pedophiles or something, sometimes I feel like some people's response is to, like, did you hear what they just said? That's so rude. Like, they can't get away with this. And the thing is, they can, and they will, and they don't give a fuck. The baseline here is they don't even think you're fully human. They have no respect for you at all. And half the audience doesn't either. And so relying on some kind of respect, assumed implied respect, like as if you were a human like everyone else, it's not a real strategy. It doesn't work. A good example of this recently is the congresswoman in the USA, Nancy Mace. She said a slur for trans people, just like on the floor, and they said, like, you shouldn't say that, like you'll get in trouble for saying that. So she just said it a load more times, like on purpose, to make a stand against trans people or whatever. And then the response from like the left, the Democrats or whatever, was just like, oh, that's a bit rude, like the decorum, or like just mumbled about politeness and offended, and it's just bullshit. Like, no one gives a fuck if you're offended, full stop. But if you're a trans person, it's not they don't give a fuck that you're offended. Some people's dedicated, that their only fucking hobby is trying to offend trans people. Like, if you say this is offensive to trans people, who cares? No one cares. No one gives a shit. The people listening on the radio don't know anything about trans people. They don't care. So we need to just cut in on the argument instead. And that doesn't mean to just accept the dehumanization. Point it out. Absolutely. This person is dehumanizing, and they would never say that to anyone else. But also what they've said is factually untrue, and it's tied into a larger conspiracy theory about LGBT people, which is now centuries old. Like, that is a way better pushback. You've just got to expect them to say something not offensive. You've got to expect them to treat you like you're less than an animal. And that is just the reality of engaging with the gender critical movement and the far right and stuff. But anyway, all these kinds of things, like the last two things I mentioned, I think there's a whole bunch of other stuff. Like, actually, another one I will say is I think probably most people consider themselves generally supportive of trans rights, but they don't really know anything about it. And if you push them to argue on it, they would just not really know what to say. And they might sometimes want to speak up and say something. And then a gender critical person might say something like, well, you can't change biological sex, and men are more likely to be violent sex offenders, so therefore I don't think we should have trans women in the toilets. And if you don't know what's going on, you might think, well, what argument have they made here? You're like, oh, I can't say anything about biological sex. I don't know about biology. Okay, I'll just concede that point. Okay, you can't change sex. And then, well, men are more violent, so I'll just concede that point. And then suddenly the whole gender critical argument is just, you've conceded to it. So the only thing you have to say back is, well, I think that trans people are valid. It's like, okay, cool. Yeah, I think trans people are valid too. But that's completely meaningless in the face of someone saying, well, because of biology and because of sexual assault, we've got to do this. And so we need to teach people what argument to actually make in response to this. To say, actually, that isn't how biology works at all. That is factually false. Secondly, men aren't biologically sexual predators. It's how society raises men to be. And there's no evidence that trans women are sexual predators more than anyone else. And they're way more likely to be the targets of sexual harassment. And also, removing trans people's human rights doesn't actually affect sexual predators at all. Like, they're all good arguments against this thing, but most people don't really know to make these. So what I think we need to do is, as a movement, come up with a better strategy. Things like, okay, the reality is we have to take on some of this bullshit argument. Whether we want to or not, we're in a position where we absolutely have to. Like, we're in full on, like, you know, backs to the wall, time to do something mode in a lot of places in the world. Secondly, I think we never want to never implicitly accept anything. Don't ever accept dehumanization. Don't ever accept implied premises which don't go addressed, but also expect them to not respect you as a person. Expect the moderator in any debate to instantly side up with this insane conspiracy theorist, bigoted lunatic just because they're both cis people and they've got more solidarity for cis people than they have for what's true. And just accept that's the reality of the battlefield. And now we need to carve out what the good lines are. We know what's true. We know that the trans rights position is the position you'd reach to if you skeptically analysed the data and rational arguments, starting from the premise that we want to minimise harm to people and maximise well-being. But that's a big mouthful, and, you know, walking through some of this is difficult. So we need, like, good lines to counter the gender critical ones, which are good slogans based on nothing. And we can, like, because we have the evidence and the facts and the rational arguments behind us, we can do better than them. I mean, they've got to rely on biological sex is binary and immutable, which is false, and it's a core premise their thing. So we should be able to come up with slogans and stuff that make people realize this is rubbish, counter it, get rid of their implied premises, and get to the point, and then so we can go on media things. If you get a chance, like maybe you're watching this and you're like, oh, maybe I want to go on the radio and whatever. Only we want people to know the situation they're going to be flung into and how to respond well. And you might only get 1 minute. And if some wacky conspiracy theorist loser comes on and says like Big Pharma invented trans kids so they could cut us trans children's genitals, you've got to be like, okay, I actually knew they were going to say this because they all believe this. No one cares if I act offended, so I'm not going to bother. And I need to cut in with something along the lines of, this is a ridiculous conspiracy theory which has no evidence for it at all. Trans people are unable to reach access to healthcare across the country, across the world, which leads to massively higher rates of depression and self-harm, etc. There's no evidence that trans healthcare is harmful at all. There is decades of evidence that trans healthcare is helpful. And in principle, the government shouldn't be able to override what experts and scientists internationally are saying is best for trans people. Like, just slam it in 30 seconds. Then they'll be like, cool, thanks, person. We'll see you again. And then they'll just cut off. End of the show. That kind of thing. You need to be able to just slam through the talking points. So, yeah. I think that's something I'm going to be involved with, is seeing what we can do to help people with that. This is a watch this space. Something's happening. But if you are good at this, contact me. Or if you're good at this and you're like, I fucking hate Katie, I don't know why I even clicked on this video, but she is right in this occasion, go and do your own thing. And just, that's cool as well. But yeah, that's what I think we need to do. Just been seeing what chat has been saying about this. Personally, as a cis ally, I've taken time to educate myself, but realistically, most people aren't as politically engaged as me. Yes, absolutely. 99% of cis people do not give a fuck. But what we need to feed them is a clear, short understanding of why the gender critical position is wrong, and to make them know that, like, the extremes, the stuff they're kind of vaguely hearing about that's happening in like the USA and Russia and stuff about trans people is insane. It is extreme. It is really horrific, like really grim. And they, the arguments they're using for this are absolutely terrible, biologically false, factually false. They're just completely making stuff up, and it's really dark. And it could come here, and it could affect someone because they don't just do it to trans people. And then people will be like, oh, so you're saying the Trump administration is wrong about biology? Yes, the entire gender critical movement is just factually wrong. Even if you don't like trans people, now you know the argument you're hearing is factually wrong. And they'll be like, okay, yeah, well, trans people are disgusting, but I do want to be correct about science. And then they'll go away and they'll think about it, and they'll be like, oh, actually, yeah, I don't. That's the kind of, we need to correct people on all of the assumptions that people are making, not just trans people are human. Someone saying here, one media training thing I learned was the 3 Ps. Always have your punches, memorable lines, proof, evidence and stats, and progress. What does that mean, and what do we do next? Yeah, that is really... I've never had official media training, as maybe you can tell. But that is basically the conclusion I've come to. You've always got to think they are going to try and throw me off. They're going to, if you're against someone, they're going to gish gallop. They're going to make stuff up. They're going to make insane logical leaps that don't make sense at all. So you've got to be ready to, firstly, just absorb that they've just said that, and you have to respond to it in 1 second. That's fine. They're going to say some off-the-wall bullshit. They're going to make things up. Then you need to, annihilate it quickly. That is just factually false. And then bring it on to the reality of it and do this like punches and evidence. I can't remember what the P was. Proof. Say, actually, this is factually false because the international medical community thinks that sex isn't binary and it's actually made up of all sex characteristics and lots of them immutable. The evidence is the following societies agree with me, And then what that means is we cannot create a system where there is only 2 labels because it just doesn't work for thousands of people. Yeah, I think that's a good summary. Transphobia as a gateway drug. Yes, it is. That's something we're going to talk about a bit later, actually. So, yeah. Oh goodness, I need to sniff. I'm gonna end up with a red nose at the end of the stream. Get rid of all my makeup. Oh well, the fun of being live in front of hundreds of people. Someone's saying here, people talk about trans people being a new thing. I've known for over 20 years. I've known that transgender was a thing for over 30 years, but go on. Yeah, I mean, this is the kind of thing that's so easy to drop into a fact thing. Like, they'll be like, we're seeing these new things, and now you're supposed to treat a man like a woman or whatever. That's just so easy to just crush in a discussion and be like, what they just said was wrong. Trans people have actually been around for centuries, and we've got evidence from it from like the Victorian era. Trans women have been using women's toilets in the UK, legally protected to do so since 1999. So any talk of removing this would be an experiment, or would bring us closer to Saudi Arabia's view of gender or something, which is a better argument than saying, oh, actually, trans people are valid and we should respect all trans people. And what I found that they just said was actually quite rude and offensive. No one cares. No one gives a fuck. But yeah, right. I'm quite hyped up about this topic, and I want to talk about it lots more. But I'm not going to, because otherwise we'll run out of time. I'm going to talk about something else now. So we are going to talk about, and this is I don't know if this is a feel-good. It's positive. But we're going to talk about David Paisley. So, David, if you were around fighting for trans rights on Twitter, in the Twitter sphere, 5 years ago, you've probably seen David Paisley. He is a cis man, gay man who's an LGBT rights activist, and he's been very spoken about combating domestic violence due to his past upbringing when he was a kid. And you can read about that in his own words. I'm not going to try and explain his story, but he has been a very strong advocate for women's rights and LGBT rights in general before like the gender critical movement and the turf wars and stuff. But he was very vocal about trans rights, and he also is like an actor, and so he's a bit of a celebrity. I actually think he might have been like the UK's hottest man some year or something. Let me see if I can find it. He was voted Britain's sexiest man by readers of Gay Times magazine 2003. So there you go. Oh God, that was not what we wanted to see. Can I close this? Yes, I can. Okay, right, we'll be editing that out. I need to remember. Didn't realize I had Discord open. Anyway, back to this. So yeah, I have met David a few times. We've talked quite a lot in DMs and things. I would say he's one of my friends, though we don't talk that often, but just so you know our relationship. But he is. I've met him, and he is just a genuinely nice person. He'd probably cringe at me saying this, so sorry, David, but fuck you. He's the kind of person who you would meet and you just couldn't not like, because he is just very warm and friendly and a nice person. Even if we didn't have any reason to associate, if we met each other, I could definitely be friends with him because he seems like a nice person. He probably thinks I'm a prick, but standard. But no, he's a genuinely nice guy. But he became one of the central targets of the gender critical movement. They really fucking hated him, and I think it's because he was so clearly pro-gay rights and pro-women's rights, and they pretend to be those things, and they don't give a fuck about those things, but they target him a lot. And if you saw this "woman won't weesht," or however you say it, thing from Scotland a while ago that J.K. Rowling was saying, it became one of the like slogans of the gender critical movement. That was actually to do with harassment that they were targeting against David Paisley. Quick summary: there was a gender critical called Marion Miller, and she like turned up at his work and made up a load of bullshit about him and was like harassing him. He went to the police about it. The police were going to prosecute her, and then they decided that they didn't have enough money to take on the case, so they just dropped it, which just left David high and dry. All the right-wing newspapers were like, Marion Miller cleared on all charges. J.K. Rowling was hyping her up. The whole gender critical movement was hyping her up. Then all of a sudden, she disappeared. No one was talking about her again. Media never covered her again. The gender criticals just one day were talking about her. The next day, no mention of her ever again. Turns out that she's like allegedly took money from a bunch of them and allegedly didn't use it for the things she said she was going to. A lot of money. When it happened, I don't know if I can say this or not. I probably will. When it happened, we knew about it straight away because we had a mole. But we couldn't really say anything about it. Anyway, I don't know if she should have said that or not. Anyway, we found out about it somehow. Anyway, that was all stuff, and that was all like targeted at David, and it was really, really horrible. And I know he really struggled with it because it was just so bleak. It's so grim being at the center of like the gender criticals like hate campaign. But of course that meant that Graham Linehan targeted him because Graham Linehan is like one of the worst, vilest people in general, but one of the worst gender criticals, and that is saying something because they have some horrible people. But Graham Linehan said a load of really extreme stuff about David, like just made up a load of things about him, and David took him to court over defamation. I don't know what the process is like in other countries, but here it seems there is several steps, and David has announced here, the High Court has ruled in my defamation case against Graham Linehan, finding that the statements he published were defamatory at common law. Huge thanks to my legal team for their support. You can read the full judgment here. And he says, for clarity, this was the trial of preliminary issues ruling. In addition to a previous ruling, this means that the court has now found all statements defamatory at common law. However, this is not the end of the case, an important step forwards. So he says you can click on this, and I mean, it's legal stuff, so you got to know what you're doing to read legal stuff because it's difficult. But at the bottom somewhere, we have the summary. Each of the publications are defamatory at common law. They bore the following meanings, which are statements of fact, save for the underlined text, which was an expression of opinion. Anyway, basically, they've ruled that these are the things that Graham Linehan has said and are defamation. The claimant is a paedophile. The claimant seeks to normalize adult male nudity in the presence of children and is therefore rightly to be described as a paedophile. The claimant seeks to normalize adult male nudity in the presence of children. Blah, blah, blah. Classic Graham Linehan stuff. It's classic anti-LGBT stuff. You don't like an LGBT person, but you can't argue against anything they say, so you just call them a pedo. So I found this review here of the of the case by a law analyst website thing. I mean, this goes into a fair amount of detail here, but on their comment at the bottom, they're just talking about, so this is from a much earlier like summary of it, but this probably isn't relevant actually. This is 2024. Anyway, it's good that this has gone forward and done this thing. I don't have much faith in the UK's defamation process. I think that in general it's only reachable by rich people, and that means that rich people often can just bully poor people, as we see with J.K. Rowling all the time, who's constantly threatening to sue people who criticize her. But I know in this case, this is not an easy financial thing for David. He's not a rich person, but is, I don't know, barely making it through. But because the case is so strong, it's so likely that he's going to win, in my opinion, that he's going to win like stuff from Graham Linehan's net worth. I don't quite know how it works, but this is a positive development, and I don't think it's the end. And I think that Graham Linehan is currently auctioning off a lot of his stuff, and I think in part this might be the reason. So yeah, we will see. Hashtag we love you, David. Yeah, David's great. It's a shame that they like bullied him off social media. But I'm glad that he's taken the break that he needs, and or maybe quit altogether. He is obviously on Blue Sky. You can follow him here. Yeah, he's a nice guy. Unless you're someone who hates people just for them being gay or trans, in which case I guess you hate him, because that's the main. That'd probably be the only reason you could come up with hate him. Anyway, let's Nobody said happy 60th birthday to me. Christy. Everyone say happy birthday to Christy in the chat for turning 21. God, what a grim time of year to have your birthday. It's a bit grey and rubbish where I live. Sorry. Right, so we're going to talk about the next thing now. We're going to talk about this. If you want to see something like unambiguously evil from the anti-trans movement, this is so trivially wrong. So the Department of Justice ordered a review of gender ideology compliance at the Child Safety Authority. The National Centre for Missing and Exploited Children said it would be removing all references to trans people from its public materials. So if you've got an organization, the National Centre for Missing and Exploited Children, it's a US non-profit, and it's fighting against child exploitation and trying to find missing children. Regardless of what you think about trans people think that trans people are a thing, right? Most trans people believe that they are someone, and telling them that they're mentally ill or something, and misgendering them, or talking to them like a human and trying to reach out to them and tell them that they have love and support. Like, why do you think most kids who are homeless or go missing do so? Well, LGBT people, like gay and trans people, are significantly more likely to be homeless when they're younger or at any point of in their life than straight cis people, and often because of abuse from family members and harassment and not being respected. And like, if you're a 16-year-old who's just come out as trans and your family has no respect for you, they're constantly bullying you about it, they're harassing you, they're treating you horribly, that might make you want to move out. Like, teenagers struggle sometimes with family relationships anyway, even when they have loving families. So when you've got a horrific, abusive, gender critical family, then I mean, no wonder LGBT people end up more likely to be homeless. But then if you've got this organization which like solely exists to try and resolve these things and find children and end the exploitation of them, if you're not even going to like refer to who they are, not even acknowledge that they exist, then are you going to be able to do that? No, absolutely not. And like, removing all references, it's just a fact that trans people are more likely to experience homelessness. In the UK, it's like, the numbers are absolutely crazy. It's something like 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 trans people in the UK experience homelessness at one point in their lives, compared to less than 1% of cis people. Like, the difference is massive, and it is because lots of people don't have supportive families. Or even some people are renting, and when they come out, they get kicked out into the streets. The Trump government is currently trying to remove all protections from trans people from that very thing. So they want to make even more trans people homeless, even more children, even more trans children homeless. And then now they want to hide all the statistics. I mean, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children is now no longer allowed to say trans people are like 100 times more likely to be homeless. And this, if you find someone who's homeless and trans, this is how you would interact with them. This is how, you know, if you think that a child is being exploited or is missing, or, you know, if you feel like you've seen a missing person, how would you like get them to contact an authority? They're not going to be allowed to say any of that on their website. So obviously the value of that just goes down completely. And for what benefit? Just because you don't want trans people to exist? I mean, there's no rational argument for this at all. Like, okay, even if you're someone who's like, being trans is like a religion, they just believe. I mean, factually false, completely rubbish, nonsense for you. But even then, like, I'm an atheist. I don't believe in any religion at all. But if there was a Christian child who went missing, how do you think that I'm gonna, like, you know? And I think there's a poster and it's like, have you seen this missing child? And I see them. Do you think I'm gonna get them to come by being like, your religion is stupid, you're mentally ill, it's not even a real thing, God doesn't exist, or do you think it'll be like, oh, you know, what's the problem? And they'll be like, oh, my family doesn't believe in my religion or something. I'm not gonna be like, well, that's because they're right and the religion isn't real. Like, it's just nonsense. It's just completely ridiculous view. It's completely indefensible. It's just disgusting. Like, unambiguously, again, for the millionth time, they just want trans people to stop existing. And in any way they can make trans people stop existing, whether that's arresting them for absolutely no reason in Florida and then doing forced detransition, which is happening and is absolutely fucking horrific, or whether it's making it so you can just kick trans people out of the rented house that they're in without any other reason, making them homeless, or whether you then make it so homeless charities can't even acknowledge the reality of what's happening and can't reach out to children who are affected by these kinds of things. The reason that this group has folded on this issue and made absolutely no attempt to fight it back against it is probably, I mean, a number of reasons, but one of them is basically all their money comes from the US government, and Trump has threatened to remove the money they get, which would basically, you know, render them useless. They have said that their operations would not change, but they were, you know, compelled to remove anything mentioning trans people. They say they were specifically to review our public-facing platforms and material for compliance, our ability to locate and recover missing children, and to protect victims of child sexual exploitation remains unchanged and will remain unchanged. But that's just not true. It just cannot be true. If you're not allowed to, like, signpost for trans people and write the facts about trans people and address trans people in a way that they're most likely to respond to you, then of course it's not going to work as well. It's just untrue. It's sad that they've had to buckle on this and they've made no effort to fight back against it. Unambiguously disgusting. Gonna stop for a sniffle break. Someone says Richard Dawkins left one religion only to join another. I don't think that's true. I don't think gender critical is a religion. I don't think being anti-woke is a religion. I don't. He probably isn't religious. I mean, to be honest, he has been on this like Christian values train. So he's like left Christianity and then kind of tangentially rejoined it, but without the Jesus bit. But calling everything you don't like a religion is kind of a crummy way of looking at the world. It's not really true. I think it devalues the work of analyzing what religions are by, you know, religions do certain things and they encourage certain kinds of behaviors and worldviews and belief systems, and non-religious groups can do similar things, and they do have some overlaps with those, and you can get cults that are not religious and cults that are religious. But just calling it all the same thing just kind of devalues the term and means that it's harder to analyze. And it is kind of derogatory of religious people. I mean, in a way that it's just unnecessary. Like I think religion is probably a net negative for the world, but if you're religious, I'm not going to try and like stop you from being religious. I believe in freedom of religion, in the classic kind of you're free to believe what you want until you start hurting people, then you can fuck off kind of way. But I do think I believe in freedom of religion, like actively. The government should actively support it, not just kind of ignore it, because as soon as you start trying to shut down religions, that does not make people cooperate. At what time in history has any ruler ever just marched into a territory or whatever and been like, right, you can't believe that anymore, and it's gone well? That isn't how it works. It's a bad idea to try and mandate religions out of the way. By all means, teach critical thinking at school. That's probably the best thing you can do. But it's a bad thing, and it instantly and inevitably ends up curtailing people's freedoms and human rights in a way that is just completely unacceptable. And most people are fine, and most people are religious, and being like, oh yeah, you know, being anti-woke is just like a religion. It's like, well, it's not really. I mean, most religious people just believe there's an afterlife and a God that loves them, and they just have some kind of blind faith that things will work out, and they don't spend all their time trying to ruin people's lives just because they're born different. So, I mean, a lot of religious people do, and they use religion as an excuse to do that, but most don't. So. China is a pretty apt example, not a good one in terms of human freedoms and abuses, but they seem to have quelled religion with some degree of success. Yeah, but why? By what means? I mean, the UK has quelled religion, in one sense, by most people here aren't really religious anymore, and haven't been for some time, and it's not really a thing people talk about, and no one really cares. I mean, we still have unelected like bishops and stuff in the Houses of Parliament, but as far as the country goes, most people don't really care. And I would like to think that that was achieved by some kind of separation of church and state and teaching critical thinking in schools. I hope. That yeah, the best way to get rid of religion is to just teach people about all the religions, allow people to believe any of the religions, and to teach critical thinking, and that's it. And religion will never go away. I think it's probably a part of humanity. But we can certainly stop it from being the Christian fascist scenario that's going on in the US. Anyway, let's move on to the next thing. The next thing is wacky as hell. Are you ready for this nonsense? No, you are not, but we are going to cover it anyway. So, a gender critical man on Twitter posted, years of transgenders harassing me and abortion being essentially a sacrament in my state. I have to stand my ground and fight for my religion here. Christ is Lord. I am sorry. Like, you see gender critical weirdo Christian Trump whatever's posting this kind of rubbish on Twitter all the time. But this one got an interesting community note. Unfortunately, this is a screenshot because now his whole account's deleted. But this was on Wayback Machine, though it wouldn't load properly. So we've just got a screenshot. The handy little context here has been added is, this user posted this during a standoff with police, where he held his 4-week-old daughter hostage. He was later killed by the police after wounding a deputy and killing a dog. The child was unharmed. And it's in several things. Oh, God. We are not supporting the New York Post. The New York Post is trash, but they had like the most information. So sorry for showing a grim New York Post article. We're not going to give him the time of day on this. if you really want to watch, he did some like live stream while he was in a shootout with the police, which is just crazy. He seems kind of deranged, but he's basically going on about how, I mean, this is just such a classic example of this kind of guy, right? So the reason the police got called is because he, 29, pushed his 18-year-old girlfriend against the wall and basically domestic violenced her to the point where the police had to be called. The police turned up and he went on some crazy rant about defending Jesus and women and straight people or whatever, and how abortion and gay rights and trans rights and the transgenders and stuff are the real reason that he's in a shootout with the police. Why is get ad block? What are you doing? Oh man. Anyway, he went on a like this crazy rant about it, all this stuff. Why do they do this? Why is that this this kind of guy that does this? They are the kind of like they treat women as subhuman, sexually harass people, they're abusive, and then when pressured, all of a sudden it's some big long rant about trans people and abortion. Yeah, and then he ended up getting shot. So that's I mean, it's a grim end to a grim story. Fortunately, the child was okay, and the child is back with the mother. His 18-year-old wife. I mean, yeah, it says authorities responded to his home after his 18-year-old wife told police he had been fighting with her and pushed her into a wall. Like, the police don't show up if you've just been having an argument. And obviously, if you're the kind of guy who's then going to go on a shootout and kill a dog and you take your daughter as a hostage, it was not a normal, like, thing. Yeah, very grim story. But, oh no, did we save this next thing? Bummer. Well, oh, let me see if I can find it, because this next thing was completely crazy. What was this guy? Farmers. Yeah, right. So the website, which I guess was where he worked. The website, DonaldTrumpWeed.com. Instantly, this is the guy. They were like, use code RIP Steve for 50% off. Like, just straight in there with making him a code, a discount code. Condolences to his wife, daughter, parents, friends, and loved ones. We'll miss you. He was in a fucking shootout and killed a dog, holding his daughter hostage because he lost his mind about trans people and gay people because he decided to assault his wife, who's 18 and he is nearly 30. Just the stuff like there'll be a thing, right? Everyone on the internet who's been on the internet, everyone probably over the age of like 16 knows about the it's ma'am trans woman, right? There was a trans woman and she went into a computer game shop or something and someone called her sir and she was having a bad day and she was like, actually it's ma'am, and it was recorded on video and she became like a hate target for the far right for like 2 weeks and now is like a thing. She basically lost her patience and was aggressive and is instantly, that's now she's used as an example of like why all trans people are bad and why she's obviously a man and all this kind of rubbish. These fucking anti-trans, anti-gay, wacko crazies will go on a fucking shooting spree and kill a dog. Who cares? He was a cis man, so it doesn't. He's a white, straight cis man. So there's no, oh, are all white, straight cis men terrorists, or are, should we be banning them from society, or should they be allowed to run the country? And none of that. No. But if this had been a trans person who did this would be international news. Every single fucking person would be talking about it. And every single media appearance that any trans person did for the next 10 years, they would have to explain this person. It just reminds me of that gender critical man who tried to blow up the dictionary. What was that? Man tries to bomb dictionary. Yeah, is it this one? Man pleads guilty to threatening to bomb Merriam-Webster offices over gender definitions. So this is like an example. Oh, I haven't got it on the screen. This is an example of like a real straightforward gender critical man terrorist, right? A guy who's trying to blow up the fucking dictionary because it had the wrong definitions of man and woman for his liking. Who knows about this? When are people ever talking about this? Every single person in the UK has heard the name Karen White or Ilsa Bryson 500,000 times. The two trans criminals in the UK. And then there are all these, like, they're not ideologically motivated. They are just two horrible people who happen to be trans. Whereas these people who are, like, using their ideological motivation to cause, like, extreme violence and, like, terrorism, in the name of being gender critical people, nothing. No one cares. No one talks about it. It's just so one-sided. This is the kind of thing, when you're doing a media appearance, be like, well, no one talks about this cisgender critical person who just like went on a shooting spree and killed a dog. No one's talking about the gender critical man who bought into the ideology so much that he tried to blow up the dictionary. Like, good pushback points. Right, goodness, my voice is starting to wear out. I hope I'm not too croaky and snotty for everyone. Would this person be the photo next to the entry for Bell End? If by this person you mean me, yes. Bell End is good word. I think, you know, obviously American English bests UK English on a lot of things, in terms of more speakers and dominating the media landscape, and accents easier for like international people to understand and things. But you're just missing out on such good insults. Bellend, twat, knobhead. They're just so good. Thank you for the compliment on my nail colour. It's quite a nice colour, isn't it? It's by Essie, if anyone's interested. It seems to last about a week with the level of slamming my fingers into... Oh, that sounds really bad. I was going to say the amount of slamming my fingers into things that I do. Not like that! Bellend is one word, like knobhead. I'll let you Google it and find out what it means. Okay, one more sniff, then we're going to go on to the next topic. Sorry, two more sniffs. The next thing we're going to talk about is, and I apologize in advance, fucking J.K. Rowling. So here is J.K. Rowling with a tweet. A banger in the GC space. This has 750,000 likes on Twitter. That is probably 100,000 real people who clicked that, and only 600,000 bots. But that's by her tweet standards, that's a lot of attention. 19,000 comments is a lot of replies. Probably largely from bots. And me, who isn't a bot. J.K. Rowling has posted this picture of Donald Trump signing a thing surrounded by white girls. And she says, congratulations to every single person on the left who's been campaigning to destroy women's and girls' rights. Without you, there'd be no images like this. And this is just unbelievable how, like, brazen this is. J.K. Rowling has been lying about trans people and spreading transphobic misinformation that the far right, like Donald Trump, has just been using word for word in their campaigns to generate people moving towards the far right. J.K. Rowling's promoted a load of people like Matt Walsh and all these like crazy gender critical men. Graham Linehan is an example of someone who used to claim to be on the left, and we've just watched him completely slide right on every single issue, from like Palestine to women's rights to abortion to Gamergate, like everything. It's very clearly a radicalizing force. As someone mentioned earlier, transphobia is a gateway drug to the far right. It absolutely is. Her lying about all these people is now why so many people are voting far right. People aren't like, wow, I am liberal on every single issue, but I'm worried that if I don't vote for Donald Trump, there won't be... my daughter might have to run with a trans girl at playground at school or whatever. Like, that just isn't the case. They have to get into this ridiculous gender critical cult that J.K. Rowling is not just a part of, not just one of the leaders of, but fully immersed inside, and believe all this ridiculous transphobic propaganda, and then believe they're like coming for your children, and then start buying into all this propaganda about abortion and sex exists from conception, and spiral out into this whole big thing about big pharma, and then you feel like you have to vote for Donald Trump. Claiming that Donald Trump here, surrounded by a bunch of white girls, banning trans girls from girls' sports, is the fault of people who have been arguing like for trans rights, is just crazy. This guy is like, especially trying to describe it as campaigning to destroy women's and girls' rights. He's literally destroying women's and girls' rights. Donald Trump, in the same, as we looked at last week, in the same fucking bill, is removing the protections from women who are sexually assaulted or sexually harassed at universities. In the same fucking thing, is removing protections for trans people. Literally part of the same ruling. Donald Trump himself is a rapist and sexual assaulter. He constantly boasts about being misogynistic, about exploiting women's boundaries, about crossing... He was talking about going into a changing room full of like young women and stuff. Like, he is everything that when you say destroying women's rights and girls' rights, he is like the example of it. And somehow J.K. Rowling is trying to blame him and people voting for him on the existence of trans people trying to fight for their rights. Like, it's just so brazen. It's just so ridiculous. Like, she is a right-wing billionaire who has exclusively been campaigning about trans rights. Nothing else. She hasn't been saying anything about the abortion ban. She hasn't been saying anything about, like, Trump being a rapist or telling everyone that they have to vote for Kamala Harris no matter what. She hasn't been doing any of that. She has just been spinning this transphobic propaganda, stuff that is just completely, trivially, factually false, that she does not give a fuck about. She doesn't care about fact-checking anything. She just makes stuff up. She was one of the people who most popularized the idea that Emaine Khalif and the other lady from Taiwan, I can't remember her name, I'm very sorry, that they were men in disguise in the Olympics when they were just intersex cis women, or maybe even not intersex. We don't even know all of the details because it's their own private medical information that they aren't required to share with anyone. Like, she is the one doing this. This was very clearly a far right, like, propaganda scaremongering thing to onboard people who are gullible. Like, that was clearly the whole point in it. It was started by some right-wing Russian boxing organization, which got disaccredited from the Olympics. And she was the one. She must have been the most famous person talking about this. She got it into the, like, eye of Donald Trump and Elon Musk, who then promoted it to their people. And because she has all these connections with these, like, low-level gender criticals and stuff, she is, like, the biggest amplifier for this stuff. She is the biggest amplifier for some little nothing made-up story about a trans person, blasting it internationally to the far right. So I think very few people did more to contribute to Trump's election than J.K. Rowling. I mean, sure, Elon Musk investing billions of dollars, the failure of the Democrats, the war in Ukraine, the war in Israel, all of these were obviously bigger factors than just one J.K. Rowling. But as far as individual people's efforts, like, she is one of the biggest megaphones for far-right propaganda. Because she is somehow, unbelievably, still has some kind of, like, upper middle class British reputation. Like, oh, well, no, she just has concerns. Like, I mean, yeah, she's just sharing all this crazy stuff. I mean, like, look at this next thing. Here is her sharing some kind of meme that your racist uncle might have shared on Facebook in 2016. Like just one of these ridiculous, crappy AI generated things. So this, you can tell this is AI because these women, there's 6 women on the page and there is 13 legs. There is just leg here, and hilariously, the creators of this obviously AI generated thing have like put their little watermark, but over the like, couldn't you just go on Photoshop and just like quickly erase this floating 13th leg? No. Okay. And then there's like an argument between 2 groups of women. There's like 3 angry looking white women here, and then there's someone who's obviously meant to be a trans woman, and then a black woman and another white woman. Of course, this side's more diverse. That's kind of realistic with the gender critical movement. But anyway, one of them saying, how come a third change room for like, she's meant to be a fucking writer and she's sharing this. How come a third change room for transgender people isn't seen as kind and inclusive enough? And they say, well, it is kind, but the inclusive part means there need to be actual women present against their will if need be in order for me to be happy. So like, just straight up, this is like a meme, that the shittest meme you've ever seen, with an extra leg and change room as a single word. Just saying trans people need to force women to do things against their will. You know what it's like using a changing room as a trans person? Exactly the same as using a changing room or a change room as a cis person, apart from there's this little thing in the back of your mind saying there's like a 1 in 10,000 chance that someone might come in and just beat the shit out of you for absolutely no reason. There's like this kind of idea that trans people need to cause cis people to suffer, or they knowingly doing it against people's will, or they like get off on it or something like this. It's just unambiguously transphobic. She doesn't just have concerns. What are you talking about? And this is her like meme in defense of this person who admitted to harassing their colleague, a nurse who got discharged for harassing her colleague who's trans, who was just trying to go about her job. None of this fucking needs to be actual women. None of this bullshit. Like, what are you talking about? Like, when I use a changing room, I just want to get changed. I don't want to. Like, I'm the kind of person who doesn't even want to have a conversation with people, with strangers, or even really with anyone. I just want to go in, do the thing, get out. Ideally, in the most like, in my little world way that I possibly can. And I think most people are like that. There's no different. I don't want there to be. Whenever I go into a changing room, I always hope that there's no one else in there. With this kind of like, oh, there needs to be actual. No, the reason why a third change room for transgender people isn't kind and inclusive is because it's neither of those things. It's segregation. Like, oh, why can't you be happy with a separate but equal room down the end of the corridor with its own sign that just puts all trans people into one? Well, firstly, because yeah, that's segregation, and segregation is bad. I mean, we've seen that the numerous times when we've ever tried to do segregation on minority populations, any country in the world. It leads to more harassment, more abuse. Secondly, who the fuck is going to spend a load of money on building a changing room just for trans people? No one. No gym is going to do that. No, like, the NHS doesn't have enough money for anything. The NHS is like struggling because the Conservatives and the new Labour government are just trying to destroy it. And you think they're going to spend money on making a third changing room for the one trans doctor in the whole fucking hospital who actually has been using that changing room for years and it doesn't affect you that she's using it at all? No, they aren't going to do that. And what's kind about excluding people? Trans women have been using women's toilets and changing rooms for longer than J.K. Rowling has been alive, without issue. Much longer than she's been obsessed with trans people. And it's just a completely made up issue. There's absolutely no rationale behind this at all. But she wrote a book. Like, she thinks change room is a word. Oh, suddenly she's got this like British middle class centrist respect behind her still, and it's just crazy that still exists. Just absolute ridiculous that she hasn't lost her reputation like Elon Musk. She is as insane as Elon Musk. That the only thing in her benefit is she doesn't do lots of public speaking engagements like he does, because she would not come across sane if she was actually in any kind of media setting where she was being asked a question and wasn't just allowed to give a pre-prepared statement. Yeah, horrible, extreme person. And if anyone is to blame for Donald Trump's rise to success and being surrounded by a bunch of white girls as he takes away their rights, it's her. So, how's everyone feeling about this? Before we move on to the next thing, let's see what chat is saying. I'd say J.K. Rowling wrote a book, is putting it a bit strongly. Plagiarized a load of books would be more accurate. I mean, she didn't, by the normal definition of plagiarism. I don't think we need to make up extra things about J.K. Rowling. She is a horrible person, and she's like a billionaire and has done nothing but weaken women's rights since she's been campaigning politically. She didn't actually plagiarize, as in lifting whole sections out of things. She stole a lot of ideas, but I mean, that's what creating art is. It's taking other people's ideas to build a new thing. Like, no art is just out of nowhere. It's always built on the things, the influences of the artists. So I know what you're saying. It was quite derivative. It was quite generic. I personally didn't really understand why it was so praised at the time. I still don't, but lots of people seem to like it. So, J.K. Rowling is a billionaire and benefits from what Elon and other billionaires are doing in the US. I'm sure she's in on it. Yeah, I mean, she has an incredibly big platform. And even if everything she said about trans people was true, when in reality, literally none of it is, even if it was, trans people would still be an absolutely insignificant issue compared to all of the stuff she could be talking about. We just watched the USA remove abortion rights of like millions and millions of people, and she knows she can move the needle on things. She manages to post stuff and get Elon Musk to talk about it, to get Donald Trump to talk about it, to get the government in the UK to talk about it, like all the time. And is she campaigning tirelessly every day for millions and millions of people to get access to abortion? No, because she doesn't care. Is she campaigning for better equality? Absolutely not, because she's a billionaire and she will never come off her throne of gold. Yeah, just this, like, all billionaires are evil because all they do is want to maintain the system. So I just put my foot down on something fluffy and it's poppy. They want to maintain the system. Feminist icon. Yeah, she's definitely a feminist icon for sure. Just one who does absolutely nothing for women, and apart from targets a small minority and just targets random women of colour who are good at sports and calls them men and sets an international far-right hate movement on them. Right, so talking of J.K. Rowling making things up and just believing it her own made-up thing, I just saw this and I thought it was a good example of the gender critical movement. So this is from 4 Women Scotland, so J.K. Rowling lives in Scotland, although I think she's English, and she's closely linked with this group, and 4 Women Scotland are the main gender critical group in Scotland. They are involved in lots of kind of bullshit that happens there. But this is one of their new campaigns, apparently. 4 Women Scotland. Imagine, if you will, a man called Pete. Pete is a manly man, tall with a beard and well-developed muscles. On Manly Men, aka GNC Trans Women. Featuring our artist impression with a little bit of help from Grok, which is the Elon Musk OpenAI rip-off thing, which generates images of Manly Pete in the changing room. The distance between manly men and gender non-conforming trans women is as thin as a cigarette paper and far more fragile. Pete could have been a manly man last month, yesterday, a mere 5 minutes before he opened the door, and all that would be valid. And here they have, wrong one, in the article, they just have a picture of this big, strong-looking man with a purse and probably too many fingers. There's something going on there anyway. Um, the thing is though, they always have to do this. Imagine this, because this doesn't actually happen. This isn't actually a real thing. They constantly have to be like, okay, well, if we just make up this thing that never happens, what happens if that happened, huh? Wouldn't that be bad? Wouldn't it be really bad if this guy just came out as trans and also had no social awareness and no like respect for what's going on, and then what, just was also a sexual predator, and then what? Like, it's just so garbage, because this is them talking about Beth Upton, the doctor. And we might as well get a picture of Beth Upton. Here she is, just a normal looking woman. Just, like, there's pictures of her as well, surrounded by other women. Here she is. Like, fucking times. Like, she's not some giant picture like this. And the reason they do this is because they know if people just see the reality of trans people's lives, they'll be like, wait, why are you trying to ban this woman from the changing rooms? Like, isn't she just trying to do her job? So they're like, oh yeah, but this isn't just about her. Imagine if like someone who was like twice as big as Arnold Schwarzenegger with like stubble that could like scratch a diamond. Imagine if he was a trans woman. And you'd be like, oh yeah, well, if I imagine that, that is kind of scary. But you have to imagine it, because in real life that isn't fucking happening. It's just totally made up. You've just totally, like, you've literally had to use AI because you couldn't even find a single example of this, even on Google Images. Like, what are you talking about? It's just such a crap argument. And they're like, oh yeah, you know, what happens if he was aggressive? What happens if blah, 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 blah? Like, what? Yeah, what happens if he turned out to be the alien from The Thing, and he then morphed into, like, your estranged brother or something? Like, what are you talking about? It's just such bullshit. All of their arguments, like, this is one of the core gender critical things, and something that you should be able to cut through when you're arguing with them. So much of their stuff relies on these ridiculous hypotheticals, and just be like, what do you mean imagine? Why isn't this happening? In the UK, trans women have used women's spaces, including changing rooms, for longer than I've been alive, for longer than you've been alive. Whoever's watching this, even if you're the oldest person in the UK, where the fuck do you think trans people have been going for using the toilet and changing rooms? They've just been doing it like everyone else. And we've been explicitly protected by law to do so since 1999, which is, looking at the demographics on YouTube, further go back in time than lots of you were born. And so where is all this examples of this manly man Pete? Why called Pete? Like, I mean, surely you should have picked a woman's name if you're going to try and do a stereotype of a trans woman. Anyway, like, where are the examples of this? Think about how many, since 1999, even if for some reason trans people are using that other thing, obviously they have to have been using it before then in order to campaign for it to be legally protected. Been that time, 26 years, in a country of like 60 million people. If even 0.5% of those are trans, that's thousands and thousands of people who are using the toilet every single day of their lives. I use the like public toilets and work toilets who knows how many times a week. Like, how often do you go to the toilet at work? Like, I don't know, 5 times in a day or something? Is that a lot? I don't even know. Maybe I should count. So if someone like me is just going to the toilet in public, like, 30 times a week or something, or in the work and something, and then there were like millions of trans people over 26 years, where are the examples of this kind of stuff happening? It's not happening. It's literally just made up. It's a hypothetical, and they're trying to use this hypothetical because they know if you look at the reality of it, what they're arguing cannot be justified. Just a completely bullshit hypothetical. Everything they do is hypotheticals. And when you see them doing it, don't concede to this pointless, like, the gender critical brain. That what they're trying to do, the gender critical brain cannot handle anything that is not a discrete binary. In their world, it is night until it is day. It is cold until it's hot. They cannot handle these like grey areas. And it's the same with the anti-abortionists. Anti-abortionists are like, well, what stage does a fertilized egg become a human? Well, I can't deal with the concept of grey areas, so for me, it's instantly. And it's the same with the gender critical. This person is a man, this person is a woman. That's it. There cannot be anything else. I cannot handle any kind of grey areas or any kind of stuff like that at all. So for them, just presenting the fact that there could theoretically be a grey area is enough for them to say, therefore the system doesn't work at all. They'll be like, oh yeah, but if you let people decide which ones best fit them, then maybe, I mean, imagine if a fucking robot wearing a dress tried to do it and they were a killing machine and it was like one of the drones that Obama told to bomb innocent civilians in the 2010. But like, what if? It hasn't happened. It doesn't happen. It's not happening today. It's not a real issue. And that's why you have to keep saying, what if? Because in reality, things are messy grey areas. When you transition, you're in this weird, messy grey area state, sometimes indefinitely, but sometimes for part of your transition, where you have to make a call every single time based on how you feel like you're being perceived, about how you feel things are safe, about how you're feeling internally. And that is a thing that cannot be legislated in some kind of discrete binary way, because reality isn't discrete and binary. But the important point here is that what we have been doing is very clearly working. Self-ID very clearly works, because the only options we have are ones we have never tried, like having an ID system for this kind of thing, or allowing members of the public to just confront people and assault people or arrest them or whatever if they don't think they look right, or whatever else the gender critical movement is proposing. We've never tried any of those. Or we have the system that we have had for longer than I've been alive, which is to let people make up their own minds, which does work without issue, because the only issues we have are hypothetical ones. So why are we having this argument? It's because when a gender critical person says, oh, imagine this crazy concept, people concede this premise. Oh, maybe it could be like that. Oh, well, okay. Well, theoretically, if this person did do that, then maybe we should accept their identity. Like, what are you talking about? This isn't real life. It's bullshit. Like, when they try and argue this stuff, the response should be, oh, but that doesn't happen. You've had to make this up on an AI because it doesn't happen in real life. But what does happen in real life is that trans women use women's spaces every single day and have done for longer than you've been alive without issue. So why are we trying to change that when we know trans women are way more likely to be victims of sexual assault, way more likely to be made homeless, way more likely to be discriminated against at work, and so singling them out even further will just make all of those things worse and benefit no one. Much better argument. Gender is generally assigned based on genitals, so I think we'll just have to shake genitals when we meet people. It's the only way. It's the only way to know. I mean, obviously, the true value of sex is chromosomes, so every time you meet someone, you do a chromosome test to see what biological pronouns you need to use for them, because that's the only way. And then if the test comes back and it says, this person is a mosaic of X and Y in equal parts, then what you do is you just say no, and then you say basic biology, and you fold your arms and you stamp your foot, and then Richard Dawkins comes out and says, sex is pretty damn binary, and then that's the end of the argument. Problem solved. Stop asking questions. But that system included fear of violence if not passing. Yeah, true, for sure. I mean, there's always fear of violence for any trans person. And in the past, things have been worse for trans people. And that's where the gender criticals want to move back to. They want to move to a system where if someone is perceived as trans, if a woman is perceived as trans, then she's just open season for violence. And that is something that we should campaign against. But what is important here is the issue here is trans people existing in public. the issue isn't trans people doing things that are bad in public. There's no crime wave caused by trans people. Trans people aren't harassing people. Unlike the gender criticals, which are constantly harassing people. They're not confronting people. They're not doing anything but exist. So when arguing, if someone says, well, in the past, wasn't it the case that if you didn't pass, you'd get beaten up? So maybe we should go back to that time. And like, what are you talking about? You're saying that the system in the past, which was just objectively worse for trans people, which has now eased off a bit because people aren't as aggressive and aren't as likely to beat up a trans person on site anymore. You want to go back to that for what reason? Since people have been more supportive of trans people, has there been an increase of crimes from trans people? Has there been this like wave of lawlessness in changing rooms? No. So what argument are you making? There's no argument here. I think we need to force some transphobes to take chromosome tests so we can know what pronouns to use. Yeah, what is interesting is I wouldn't, like, my philosophy, my ideology says that we shouldn't expose people's medical data without their consent. However, if gender criticals are so confident about their things, I would encourage all of them to go and get sex tested. Because there are so many of them, thousands of gender critical people, the odds are that one of them is going to get a result that they don't like. And what's going to happen then? Do you think all of your fellow gender critical cultists are going to like rally up and say, oh, well, this person's actually want to... No, they're going to fucking eat you like piranhas. There's going to be... I don't know if you've ever seen a video of piranhas when they're in the time of the year where there's not much food and one of them like shows a sign of weakness and then like they're just eaten in a shred. That is what it's going to be like for you if you were to fail a sex test. J.K. Rowling will be posting about how you're a sexual predator on Twitter to nearly 1 million people within 24 hours. So there will be no loyalty there at all. Well, not loyalty. It's not really the right word. There'll be no... They'll be like, oh, this person who I thought was a woman my entire life and I have regularly experienced misogyny. They can't have experienced misogyny because my ideology says if you've got these chromosomes, you can't experience some misogyny. So therefore, stop thinking. End of conversation. I'm going to eat you like a piranha now. I'm sorry, it's really disgusting that I'm blowing my nose on stream. Not very ladylike, huh? How many people are watching? 300 people watching me blow my nose. Good stuff. Lols if J.K. Rowling turned out to be XY. She's probably one of the few who wouldn't get eaten by like a piranha. But she would just lie about it. Anyway, let's talk about the next thing. On the subject of gender critical people not being feminists in any way at all, here is Janice Turner, who is a gender critical person and is not a feminist in any way at all. Unfortunately, I'm not going to pay for the Times, so if you want to read this article, it is archived and you can go on archive.com. But the article is just crap. It's just the same gender critical rubbish that you'd expect. I just kind of wanted to talk about the vibe of the article rather than go into the details because it's the same just rubbish, always. Janice Turner, gender critical feminist, says sports edict makes Trump a feminist hero. The man who used to boast about pussy grabbing is being lauded by women after common sense stroke of his pen. No, he's not. What are you talking about? There are a bunch of right-wing women who support Donald Trump, and they also supported him removing abortion rights from women. And they also supported his pussy grabbing comment and him being a sexual predator and an adulterer and all of the things that he is, because some women have decided that their best way of moving through the misogynistic world is to suck up to some of the misogynists and to be spared some of the misogyny because they've done so. Or they've been brought up in a cult and they believe that they are just inferior. Like that's a real position that some people have. The man who used to boast of, like, Donald Trump has not changed. If you think that Donald Trump has changed, you have lost your mind. He is every bit of a misogynist now as he was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 35 years ago. Like, he is a misogynist at his core, at his heart. One of his most fundamental values is that he is a misogynist. More so, probably, like, Donald Trump doesn't really believe many things. He believes in him being great and him making money, and probably one of the few things that he actually believes in is misogyny. He is a misogynist. Like, that is a true belief of his. And somehow Janice Turner and the gender critical movement are trying to spin this. Not only J.K. Rowling was just saying, oh, this is all the fault of trans people, but now, like, Janice Turner and J.K. Rowling are on good terms. They constantly promote each other. Now she's saying, actually, that was a good thing. He's a feminist hero now. What the fuck are you talking about? The gender critical is such a joke. Like, they're pretending to be feminist, and then they're blaming Donald Trump on trans people, and then they're also applauding Donald Trump, like, at the same time. See no hypocrisy here or anything. Janice Turner constantly writes stuff like this. This isn't just some one-off. She's not some, like, you know, stalwart feminist who's just made one bad judgment or whatever. Like, I just want to look at some of her other ridiculous, crazy headlines. For example, this time last year, it's time feminists started listening to men. The lives of young males are getting harder, ignored by liberal politics, and that only makes things worse for everyone. This is just such a, I have no idea what a feminist is, take of feminism. Like, the idea that feminism doesn't directly analyze the roles of men in society and listen to what they're saying and analyze what they're doing is just crazy. Like, feminism isn't just the study of women, it's the study of politics and society, which has led women to be in the position that they are in society today. And obviously, half of the fucking study of this has to be about men, because they are half the people. Yeah, just absolutely delusional. Obviously, her other classic, children sacrificed to appease trans lobby. Need to say that in the voice of Commander Sterling there. From Topshop's cave-in on changing rooms to the S&P's guidance for schools, there's a mindless rush to appear right on. Like, Janice Turner is a complete wacko. Regularly writes for the Times, regularly writes all this, like, anti-feminist garbage. She's not a feminist in any sense of the term. Like, you just could not argue that. Unless you're in a world where someone can just be anti-trans and then be called a feminist, like Donald Trump, a feminist hero. What are you talking about? Time to listen to men. What are you talking about? Just a complete nut job. And why are people like this still taken seriously as some kind of feminist voice? Like, she writes for the Times, which is a right-wing newspaper. She never writes on actual feminist issues. She's not promoting feminist stuff. She's like, just talks about anti-trans stuff and then writes a bunch of anti-feminist articles too. Like, why in maybe in the USA and Canada and Australia and all the other places that people are listening to this, maybe you're like, we have people like this in our country and they're just right-wing. And I think that's true in the USA and stuff. Is the people writing this are just like out and out Trump supporters, fine, whatever. But in the UK, these people still pretend they're on the left, and there'll be people who are actually on the left who will take them at their word. And when you're like, this person's a fucking, right-wing conspiracy theorist, they're like, not everyone who disagrees with you is blah, blah, blah. Like, I just don't know how these people have this, like, reputation still. Nonsense. What else have we got? Oh, we have one more thing. That's good, because my voice is absolutely dying. How's chat doing? Are you still with me? I nearly drunk Poppy's water then. Spencer saying, I call them gender absolutists, and they don't seem to like it, but it fits. I like their term of sex realist, because it's very Democratic People's Republic of Korea, or race realist. It's very like gender critical is the same, because if any group is critical of gender, it's trans people, and if any group of them is like blindly accepting of gender, it's the gender criticals. But gender is a feminist topic, and it's complicated and people don't really understand it. Sex realist, it's just like, I cannot believe, like, I remember joking with people in DMs like, oh, they're going to be calling themselves sex realists next, and then it just fucking did. I was just like, what? Are you seriously going with sex realist? You know what a race realist is, right? Like, it's a racist. A sex realist. A sex realist is someone. You're a sexist. You're not a realist at all. Like, it's the the people who call themselves like reality enjoyer or like rationalist, like critical thinking, free thinker. Like, they're just desperate to flag themselves as something that they are absolutely not at all. Sex realist is just great because they're almost doing the propaganda for us. So you're someone, it's like a 9/11 truther. That's what it's like. Someone who believes that the entire of modern medical science is false. Because the real truth behind the big conspiracy by Big Pharma to blah blah blah. The nose blowing will be over soon, everyone. Sorry. Gender absolutists or sex realists are both good. As someone who is gender critical, as in the legitimate academic sense, it irks me that they've come up to the term where they're not critical at all. Yeah, it's kind of frustrating, but at the same time, I mean, that's what feminist means. Someone who's critical of. I mean, critical. Critical is such a crap description, though, isn't it? Like, oh, I'm actually critical. It's like, oh no, you're not a climate activist. I'm global warming critical. I'm just critical of it. Like, I don't think it's not like we don't need to end it. I'm just a bit like, should we really have global warming? Seems like not the best thing. Reality enjoyer. What a fucking dystopian thing to describe oneself as. Yeah. You see it like, it's just the classic, like, you click on some blue tick on Twitter and their profile will be called like, it'd be like, reality enjoyer, truth believer, defender of women, anti-abortion, like, women back in the kitchen. I don't know, it's just like all these things that just go together, and they'll call themselves reality enjoyer, and then they'll believe that, like, we never landed on the moon or something. It's just so embarrassing. Here in the US, we can't say climate change, we say climate resilience. Not heard that term. I mean, critical in the way that we use it. Yes, sorry. So I know critical has a real, like, academic use. Sorry, I was just being a dickhead, really. I'm not like a psychologist, so I just mean in layperson's terms. It's like, yeah, I mean, the term I'm gender critical in the sense that I'm a feminist, and I think gender as a construct is just some made up bullshit to control women and LGBT people, and that makes me like that's a critical analysis of it, critical theory. But also it sounds a bit like, oh yeah, well, I was a little bit critical of that. Oh, you wanted to introduce a social system to subordinate women? I'm a bit critical of that. Anyway, this next thing is something that I was talking about at the start, about the things we actually need to push back on and the arguments we actually need to make. And I think that these kind of things are important. So here we have the Evolution Society. This is a public letter to the US President and Congress on the scientific understanding of sex and gender. And this has been signed by Carol Boggs, PhD, the president for the Study of Evolution, Society for the Study of Evolution, Daniel Bolnick, PhD, president of the American Society of Naturalists, and Jessica Ware, PhD, president of the Society of Systematic Biologists. And their societies represent over 3,500 scientists in the US. This is like a big open letter from three big organizations. They say, Dear President Trump and members of US Congress, as scientists, we write to express our concerns about the executive order defending women from gender ideology extremism and restoring biological truth to the federal government. Like, if you ever want to see a fucking 1984, like, the Ministry of Truth or whatever, the Ministry of... It's just restoring biological truth to the federal government. Just so clearly like some culty bullshit. Anyway, order that states first that there are two sexes which are not changeable. The order goes on to state that sex is determined at conception and is based on the size of gamete that the resulting individual will produce. These statements are contradicted by extensive scientific evidence. Scientific consensus defines sex in humans as a biological construct that relies on a combination of chromosomes, hormonal balances, and the resulting expression of gonads, external genitalia, and secondary sex characteristics. There is a variation in all of these biological attributes that make up sex. Accordingly, sex and gendered expression is not a binary trait. While some aspects of sex are bimodal, variation along the continuum of male to female is well documented in humans through hundreds of scientific articles. Such variation is observed both at the genetic level and at the individual level, including hormone levels and secondary sex characteristics, as well as genital morphology. Beyond the incorrect claim that science backs up a simple binary of sex, the lived experience of people clearly demonstrates that the genetic composition at conception does not define one's identity. Rather, sex and gender result from the interplay of genetics and environment. Such diversity is a hallmark of biological species, including humans. We note you state that basing federal policy on truth is critical to scientific inquiry, public safety, morale, and trust in the government itself. We agree with this statement. However, the claim that the definition of sex and the exclusion of gender identity is based on the best available science is false. Our three scientific societies represent over 3,500 scientists, many of whom are experts on the variability that is found in sexual expression throughout the plant and animal kingdoms. More information explaining why sex lies along the continuum can be found here. If you wish to speak to one of our scientists, please contact any of the societies listed below. And they have some articles here about it. So this is quite strongly worded for like an official thing from scientists. And importantly, well, not importantly, I was going to say importantly, this is what I've been saying for fucking years. That isn't important at all. Who cares whether I was right or not? What matters is this idea that sex is a trivial, immutable binary that is defined at conception is so readily accepted as a premise by people who don't really know how to argue for trans rights. And you need to spot when that is being premised. And if you're not, okay, so if you're someone who's not super great at arguing or debating, or you don't have much experience of it, you might even know really what I mean by when I say being aware of when something is like a premise, like a hidden premise, an implicit premise. What I mean is, if you say something like, there are lots of claims. I'm just trying to think of a really easy example. of a claim that you can make which has like an implicit premise. I mean, I guess even something like the statement, "What are you going to do tomorrow?" is implying that we all are on board with the idea of days and that there will be another one in the future and that you have some kind of say in what you're doing. Like, all of those things are true. But there's like implicit premises all the time in when anyone makes a statement or a claim or something. And you'll see a gender critical person or a transphobic person or an anti-trans person will argue something like, men are more dangerous than women, men are stronger than women, men are something and women aren't. And you can't change sex, therefore trans people should be treated in accordance with their birth sex by law and society. And I think a lot of people just accept this initial premise that sex is binary and that sex is immutable, and also the premise that it is the thing that is the cause for men being more likely to be involved in violent crime or more likely to sexually assault people. And I mean, all of those parts aren't strictly true, but certainly it's not true, as we just looked from this letter, it's just not true that sex is binary or that sex is immutable. These statements are contradicted by extensive scientific evidence. That is just true. And that doesn't mean that when someone's making this argument, that you should solely focus on this one thing. Because really, actually, it doesn't matter whether sex is binary or not, or whether you can change sex or not. Because what matters is whether trans people need the protections that we're fighting for. Which could theoretically be true regardless of sex. But actually, as it happens, sex isn't binary. And I think you need to be able to confidently and strongly assert this. And you can do that when you know for a fact that the science is on this side. You should go away and read this and read the studies they're linking to. Go and understand it better if you want to make these arguments. But when you need to understand that when gender critical people make arguments, not only is the thing that they are literally saying almost always bullshit, it's almost always false, made up, even the like implicit stuff, sometimes that's how they get away with some of their arguments, is they'll say something crazy, but whether that's true or false or not, regardless of that, they're implying that something is true underneath, and you just confront the thing on top, but you're still agreeing with this. You're like conceding to this hidden premise underneath, and you need to confront those. Like, you need to confront those head on so that you can undermine the arguments in a better way and make it more clear to people who are arguing for trans rights. When they say you can't change sex, what they're trying to do, like a classic anti-trans, transphobic, right-wing shithead dunk, is they'll be like, so you believe you can change sex? And if you say yes, they'll be like, oh, you're mentally ill because you believe you can change chromosomes. It's like, I do not believe that I can change chromosomes. I didn't say that. But they're trying to get you to, they do this little shifting definition of sex, and when they say it in one context, it means one thing. When they say it in another, it means something else, and they contradict each other, but they don't care. When they say, can you change sex? They might be trying to set you up for this stupid dunk when they try and say that you don't understand what chromosomes are. So you can give a bit of a longer answer, and you can be like, sex is just your sex characteristics, and you can change almost all your sex characteristics, and you can certainly change all the ones that affect your life on a like day-to-day basis. That's a decent answer. That's a good combat to the comment they're making. And when they'll be like, you can't change sex. Now they're on the defense. They'll be like, well, like, you can't change your chromosomes. Well, I mean, that's actually complicated, but you generally can't change your chromosomes. Well, all the rest of it you can change, right? You agree that, right? You can change genitals, right? You know that's a thing, yeah? You can change hormone levels, yeah? And you know about epigenetics and how that turns on and off certain genes and how it changes, like, every single organ in your body. Yeah, you agree with all that. You just don't think we can change chromosomes. Okay, so why are chromosomes more important than the rest of sex? Like, sex isn't just one thing. And they're like, sex is just one thing. And like, okay, so now you're arguing that someone's sex is just one thing. So you're saying if we did a test and I found out that I was XX, which by the way is not impossible, very unlikely, but there are absolutely some trans women out there who are, because it's, you know, like 1 in a million and there's more than a million of us. And also I've talked to a couple of them. You just accept they're women now, do you? No, you don't. Because that isn't actually what you think sex is. You think sex is this magic essence that like floats around and follows you around, and you say biology a lot, you say the key words, but actually you'll just completely weasel out of it and move the goalposts as soon as you're confronted with the reality of it. There are cis women out there who are XY. There are trans women out there who are XX. You do not think that those cis women are men. You do not think that those trans women are women. So therefore, what you're saying isn't actually what you believe. It's false. You've contradicted yourself. There you go. End of the argument. Very easy to shoot down. Anyway, the science is absolutely, the evidence is absolutely on the side of pro-intersex, pro-trans rights, and the fact that sex isn't binary or immutable, and that it isn't just some 1D property, and it isn't something you get at conception. It's completely a nonsense statement. You should push back on that as much as you do on flat Earth or, you know, anti-evolutionists or anything like that, because it just as non-scientific. Non-scientific. Oh, what a crap sign off. I was just going to finish that little segment and I've scuffed it. It is just as non-scientific. Anyway, everyone, how are you doing now? Why do you think trans is accepted in Iran but not in the West? It's because you lumped yourself in with the non-binary and LGB. Interesting comment. Actually a bigger topic than I probably have energy for now, but trans people aren't really accepted in Iran. Some very specific subset of trans people are sometimes accepted. Only if they perform like extreme stereotypical gender roles, and even then they're still considered lesser. And although the Iranian state on occasion does provide trans healthcare, it's very specific and only in order to fit people into certain gender roles. But it's to do with some quirk of the like religious ideology held by the people who are in charge, where they believe that the soul has a gender and that is more important than your physical body, whereas that isn't what people think in lots of other places. So I wouldn't say that trans people are accepted in Iran. I think trans people are a lot more accepted in the UK than they are in Iran. And like, I probably have, you know, a freer life than many trans people who live in Iran. And we didn't lump yourselves in with gay people and intersex people and whatever else you said, non-binary. We get lumped into that by the bigots. Like, it might be the case in Iran that gay people are seen differently to trans people, but in most countries, certainly in the UK and in the US, for a long time, trans people were just seen as like an even gayer version of gay people. Like, there was a gay man and then there was a transsexual who was like even gayer than that. And we're just all seen as the same thing. And there is like historically a blurry line between those things. There are a lot of people whose coming out process isn't so like night and day. Some people, when they come out, they are like, oh, I'm doing this from tomorrow onwards, everything's changing. And like, that's kind of how I came out of work, but it's not how I came out in the rest of my life. And it was more like a slow transition from, you know, living oh, and now this thing's kind of changing, but I'm not really announcing it, and um, and so you trans people just end up getting lumped in with gay people, and also the reason in the West why people oppose trans rights is the same reason that they oppose gay rights, and that's because the rules of patriarchy here are that men are superior to women, and it's important that you can't change between one group or the other, or break up what the rules are, because that undermines the whole system. Like, trans people existing undermines the whole of patriarchy here, whereas maybe in a place where the overwhelming ideology that everyone holds as a core value is that your soul has a gender, then trans people existing doesn't really undermine that. You're just saying, oh yeah, your soul is female and female souls are inferior. Like, okay, but just isn't how people view the world here. But yeah, I think it's a kind of a nonsense thing. And also, like, to say we had any say in being on the same like campaign as gay people and non-binary people, I mean, we don't get a say in that at all. Even if, right, okay, let's just say I'm one of these true transsexual types who doesn't like non-binary people and doesn't like gay people, or whatever fucking bullshit position. There are some, the Blair White position or whatever. If I held the values that non-binary people and gay people are bad or meaningless to me, it would still be in my political selfish interest to support and have solidarity with gay people and non-binary people, because as a political bloc we have a lot of shared enemies, and we are making the same arguments about bodily autonomy, freedom from government oppression, freedom from enforced gender roles. And if I was to, the only way that I could like engage in arguing against non-binary people's rights or gay people's rights would be to make the arguments being made against me to other people, and to just say, but I'm different. And maybe in your mind you can draw some arbitrary line as to why, oh, real true transsexuals are better than everyone else. Like, you might be able to rationalize that. But in reality, if you're just validating this thought pattern of the government should be able to control people's bodies, the government should be able to overrule scientists, roles in society should be able to control your destiny and decide who you are and who you can fall in love with. As soon as you stop validating these arguments, then when people hear them enough, they'll just use them against you. Of course they will. People's brains just make patterns in their mind, and when they get into the same pattern enough, they'll just see that argument everywhere. And it's why we see a bunch of transphobic people go from being like normal to, in the J.K. Rowling cult, to losing their fucking minds, to now being pro-Gamergate, anti-abortion, anti-gay marriage, crazy MAGA Trumpers. Like, that's a real thing that happens. And it's because when you accept this argument that the government should be able to control trans people's bodies and lives and freedoms, it's not much of a step to say they should be able to do the same thing for gay people or non-binary people or anything like this. The idea that trans people are more spicy than gay people, I think that's observably true. That society has had, or is currently in a stage where there's more acceptance for gay people than there is for trans people, and there's more acceptance for like binary trans people than there is for non-binary trans people, and there's this kind of thing. There's always the further that you move away from patriarchy, the more difficult it will be. And certainly in the West, I mean, I guess we're still on the topic of Iran. In the West, having marriage and the family unit is a very core patriarchal concept, and the idea that 2 men should be able to do that or 2 women should be able to do that is wrong from that point of view. But it's much easier to accept just that one change, because like the whole family unit is still there, everything's still there, but in this case we're allowing this thing to be different. To allow binary trans people is allowing people to move from one category to the other, and they don't like that at all, so that is more difficult. But then to say, well, actually, these whole categories, they're not natural categories, they don't really exist, they're just societal ones, that's even more difficult. Yeah, the classic, why can't you just be gay? Some parents, yeah, lots of parents. And I'm sure that non-binary people hear, why can't you just be a woman, or why can't you just be a man? And gay people hear, why can't you just do this in private? You know, classic. And that's a good example of people using the same argument patterns against all these different people. Why can't you just be more normal? Is the argument pattern that's being used here. So, yeah, I think it makes no logical sense for you to be a trans person and be opposed to non-binary people or intersex people or any other group who is maybe more spicy than us. And certainly in the West, it makes absolutely no sense for you to be a trans person to be anti-gay, because the majority of people see you as like gay plus. So if you start dunking on gay people, then lots of people are just going to think you're dunking on yourself. Yeah, it's a nonsense position. I can certainly see, if you were selfish, you could say, I'm not going to actively argue for non-binary people's rights. That's just going to, it may or may not fall out of the reality of it. And I think, although that is selfish, I think it's probably not strategically beneficial for you to not show solidarity, because no one's going to come out to help you if you don't go out of your way to help them. But I think you could justify focusing on the thing you know about best, and that's fine. And if you're the kind of, I'm not trying to justify like selfish activism here, or justify the kind of trans people or any fight for true transsexuals or any kind of rubbish like that. But I think you can, if you are not buying my arguments completely, and you're like, okay, I see what you're saying, but okay, what you need to do is do your thing and fight for your like everyone here has to accept that trans people are in a bit of a bad spot at the moment, and we all need to fight together to push for progress for trans people. If you are focusing on fighting for people just like you, that's fine. Just do not get in the way of all of these people who are, whether you like it or not, ideologically lumped in with you, and who are fighting the same arguments as you and fighting against the same people as you. If you want to go and say people like me should have access to rights, if you then turn around and say, but gay people and non-binary people and whatever intersex people shouldn't have rights, you're an idiot, because you're just validating the anti-LGBT position in general and trying to carve out an exception for you. The people coming for you don't give a fuck about exceptions. They don't think you're any different. They might nod their heads along and say, yeah, exactly, when you're saying some anti-non-binary thing, but it's fake validation. If you think that they're validating you in any kind of way, like you're being a sucker. Anyway, I've gone on a bit. My voice is dying, as you can hear. I need to do some sneezing, so hopefully I'll be better. I think my voice has been like croaky and crap for the last 3 weeks, so I do apologise, but hopefully we'll be back to full power next week. And, well, I mean, we probably won't be, because I'm going to go out drinking this weekend, so I'm probably going to be a goblin on Monday. But maybe by Wednesday I'll be better. And I did actually plan to have the outro segment on this, because I know that, like, when I cut it off, it ends in the right place on Twitch or on YouTube. It, like, cuts off the last minute of what I say or something. I'll do that next week. I haven't done it this week. So maybe I'll flip to the starting soon screen, and then when I see that get to YouTube, we'll end the stream there. But thank you very much for watching, everyone. we'll see you at the same time next week, 8 o'clock UK time. And yeah, let's do some stuff. Let's think about some arguments and come up with get some momentum going.